A maid under suspicion, a missing heirloom. What happened next no one expected. The afternoon sun spilled across the grand house like a golden veil, warming the marble floors and glinting against the glass chandeliers. The mansion stood in quiet splendor, its rooms filled with the weight of wealth-ornate furniture imported from distant countries, delicate porcelain displayed in shining cabinets, and oil paintings staring down from the walls with expressions both stern and proud. Everything was meticulously placed, every detail arranged to remind anyone who entered that this was a home of status, of power. Amidst the silence of this opulence moved the maid. She walked with quiet steps, careful not to disturb the hush of the afternoon. She was a black woman, modest and humble in appearance, yet there was something almost regal in the way she carried herself. Her uniform, though plain, was neatly pressed. Her shoes, though worn from long hours of work, tapped softly against the floors in an unbroken rhythm of discipline. She moved from room to room with the grace of someone who knew every corner, every creak of the house, as if the very heartbeat of the mansion pulsed in time with her own. Her hands, roughened from years of labor, worked with a gentleness that seemed almost reverent. She dusted the wooden banister as though it were a relic, polished the silver candlesticks until they shone like mirrors, and straightened the curtains so they would fall just right, catching the golden glow of the setting sun. Every object she touched was treated with respect, as if it carried a story, as if it deserved her care. To an outsider, her work might have seemed routine, mechanical. But to her, it was an act of quiet devotion, a discipline she carried like a sacred duty. And yet, for all her dedication, she lived under a cloud of silent suspicion. The family she served never truly saw her, not her dignity, not her honesty, not the small sacrifices she made each day to keep their world in order. They saw only her skin, her silence. Their gazes followed her like shadows, heavy with doubt. When she entered a room, their conversations would falter, their voices lowering just slightly, as though guarding secrets that she had no right to overhear. When she bent to polish the floor or arrange the books on a shelf, she felt their eyes lingering too long, watching as if waiting for her to make a mistake, to confirm the mistrust they carried quietly but constantly. The mistress of the house was the worst. A woman of sharp features and sharper judgment, her eyes seemed to pierce through the maid whenever she passed. She spoke with courtesy, but her tone carried a cool edge, a reminder of the unspoken divide between them. Even the smallest tasks, the folding of napkins, the arrangement of flowers, were inspected with an intensity that suggested she was not simply evaluating the work, but searching for something to criticize, something to confirm the prejudice. She never dared to voice aloud. The maid felt it all, though she never responded. Her silence was not ignorance but strength. She understood that defending herself would not soften their suspicion, it would only sharpen it. So she let her actions speak for her. She chose patience over resentment, diligence over despair. But in the stillness of her heart, she carried the weight of their doubt, a burden as heavy as the house she maintained. As the day stretched toward evening, the mansion glowed with the radiance of her labor. Floors gleamed, windows shone, and the scent of polished wood lingered in the halls. Yet no matter how much she gave, no matter how perfectly she worked, the air around her never shifted. Trust was a luxury she was never afforded. The golden light of the afternoon made the house look beautiful, but beneath that beauty was an unspoken truth. Here was a woman who gave her all, yet remained unseen. Her honesty lived in every careful gesture, every quiet act of service, but the eyes that followed her did not see honesty. They saw only suspicion, always waiting for her to stumble. Doubt into open accusation. She had seen it before, how quickly honesty could be dismissed when it came from someone like her. She could shout, she could swear upon her very soul, and still their eyes would narrow, their lips would curl, their prejudice would whisper. Of course she would deny it. They always deny it, so she bore the silence. She carried it like a cloak, heavy but unbroken. In her silence was a kind of defiance, a refusal to let their doubt shake the truth she held within herself. And yet, in the stillness of her heart, sorrow stirred. For what is more painful than being accused of the very thing one despises most? What is heavier than knowing your honesty means nothing to those who refuse to see it? At night, when the house fell asleep and the golden halls grew dim, she would pause in her work. Standing by the tall windows, she would let her eyes wander. Beyond the iron gates, into the darkened streets where shadows moved freely. There, she thought, might lie the answers. She had noticed small things, details others dismissed. A gate unlatched when she was sure she had closed it. A faint footprint across the marble floor that did not belong to her. A curtain swaying, though. No breeze had entered. Clues, like whispers, waiting to be heard. But who would listen? Who would believe her? So she tucked those details away in her mind, gathering them like scattered threads. She carried them quietly, knowing that if truth was ever to rise, it would rise not through her voice, but through time itself. And so the house remained divided, its surfaces polished, its beauty unbroken, but its air thick with suspicion. Each day the whispers grew louder, the stares sharper, the weight heavier. She endured, calm on the outside, aching on the inside, moving like a shadow through halls that gleamed with her labor but resounded with their mistrust. The family waited for her to slip. She, in turn, waited for the truth. The days stretched on, heavy with suspicion. The house gleamed beneath her hands, yet the silence inside it grew sharper, almost brittle. The family's eyes followed her as though every polished surface, every folded napkin, every sweep of her broom was another chance for her to betray them. And though their voices accused her without words, she kept moving with quiet steadiness, her face unreadable, her soul aching beneath the weight of doubt. But even in the midst of this storm, she noticed things the family did not. Small things, fragile details, almost invisible to those who did not look closely. It began one afternoon as she was closing the windows in the drawing room. The sun had slipped lower, filling the room with a soft amber glow. She reached for the latch and froze. The window, which she was certain she had locked that morning, stood slightly ajar. A thin breeze stirred the curtains, whispering across the floor. For a long moment, she stared at it, her fingers hovering over the latch. Then, with a calm motion, she closed it and said nothing. Another day, as she polished the marble floors of the hallway, her eyes caught something faint, a smear of dirt near the baseboard. At first, it seemed like nothing, a simple mark left behind by careless footsteps. But when she knelt to wipe it clean, she saw the shape more clearly. The outline of a shoe, too large to belong to the children, too heavy to be her own. The print faced inward, toward the heart of the house. She wiped it away, her hands steady, though inside her chest her heart gave a painful thud. Later still, she noticed the garden gate. Each evening she checked it, ensuring it was bolted before the sun disappeared. Yet one twilight, as she stepped into the cool air to shake out the linens, she saw it swinging gently, unlocked. Her hands tightened around the fabric. She knew she had secured it earlier that day. She stood there for a moment, staring into the quiet street beyond, its shadows deepening with night. A shiver moved down her spine, but she turned back to the house in silence. And then there were the glimpses, brief, fleeting, but impossible to ignore. Twice she thought she saw a figure lingering near the edge of the garden, just beyond the iron fence. A boy, perhaps a teenager, half hidden by the hedges. He never lingered long enough for her to call out. By the time she turned her head fully, he was gone, swallowed by the dimming light. To the family, it would sound like nothing more than a servant's imagination. But she knew better. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to form in her mind. An open window, a footprint, an unlocked gate, a shadow where no one should be. They were whispers of a truth she could feel but could not yet hold, and yet she remained silent. She told no one, not because she did not wish to, but because she knew the weight of their disbelief would crush her words before they left her lips. If she claimed that someone else had entered the house, they would laugh, shake their heads, remind her of the valuables that vanished while she was the only one inside. To them, her observations would be nothing more than desperate excuses. So she carried these fragments within her, storing them like hidden treasures. She polished the silverware, swept the floors, and dusted the shelves, all the while keeping her secrets close. Outwardly, she was the same quiet, humble, devoted. Inwardly, she was watchful, her eyes sharp to every movement, her ears attuned to every creak of the old house. The family believed she was guilty because they were blind to anything else. But the maid had begun to see what they refused to. The truth was out there, lurking at the edges of the golden mansion, waiting for its moment to be revealed. She only needed patience. And patience she had in abundance. The air inside the mansion seemed heavier that afternoon, as though the walls themselves anticipated the storm about to break. The sun, still bright beyond the windows, spilled golden light across the polished floors, but its warmth could not soften the tension pressing through the house. It began with a cry from the mistress of the house. A sharp gasp, followed by the frantic clatter of boxes thrown open, drawers yanked too hard, velvet cases overturned. Her voice carried down the hallway, shrill and breaking. "It's gone. The necklace, my mother's necklace, it's gone." The heirloom was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of the family's wealth, its history, its pride. Gold links, heavy yet delicate, adorned with a pendant of rare stones that caught the light like fire. Generations had guarded it, passing it down like a crown, and now it had vanished. The house erupted. Footsteps thundered across the wooden floors. The master's voice bellowed commands: search the rooms, question the servants, check every corner. Drawers were pulled open, cupboards flung wide, cushions torn apart. In desperation. Yet the necklace remained missing, swallowed by some unseen hand. It was not long before suspicion found its mark. The family gathered in the grand living room, their faces flushed with rage and fear. The mistress sat stiffly on the velvet sofa, her eyes sharp with accusation. The master paced back and forth like a caged animal, his fists clenching with each step. The children lingered in the corner, their wide eyes mirroring the storm that filled the room. And at the center of it all stood the maid. They had called her in with voices too calm to be genuine, words dripping with the weight of accusation before they were even spoken. She stood quietly, her hands folded before her, her gaze lowered not from guilt, but from the heaviness pressing against her spirit. The mistress's words cut through the air. "It is always you who is near when these things go missing. You move through the rooms, you touch everything we own. And now this necklace, the most valuable of all, gone. Tell me, where is it?" The master's voice followed, deeper and harsher. "Enough games, we have tolerated too much. Admit it now, and perhaps we can be merciful. But do not insult us with lies." The maid lifted her eyes then, and though her hands trembled at her sides, her posture straightened. For a moment, silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. She felt the weight of their gazes, the heat of their judgment pressing upon her like fire. She could hear the rapid beat of her own heart, but when she spoke, her voice carried with a steadiness born not of certainty, but of quiet courage. "I have taken nothing," she said softly, yet firmly. "But if you will not believe my words, then allow me this, give me one day. If by tomorrow I cannot prove my innocence, then you may do as you wish with me." The room fell still. The mistress blinked, her lips parting in disbelief. The master stopped pacing, his brow furrowed in suspicion. The request sounded absurd, almost laughable. How could a maid, a woman of so little power, prove anything against the weight of their suspicion. The mistress scoffed, folding her arms tightly. You expect us to wait? To give you time for another lie? But the master, after a long pause, nodded slowly. There was a cruel confidence in his eyes, as though her plea were nothing more than a futile struggle before the inevitable. Very well, he said, one day, but know this: you will fail. And when you do, there will be no forgiveness. The children whispered in the corner, sensing the severity, though not fully understanding. The maid stood alone in the center of the room, her heart pounding, her palms damp with sweat. Yet she bowed her head slightly, accepting their terms without another word. In that moment, she was no longer just a servant accused of theft. She was a woman standing at the edge of a precipice, with truth on her side, but doubt closing in from every direction. And as she turned to leave the room, the golden light of the afternoon flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch with her. Tomorrow would decide everything: her honor, her place, perhaps even her future. For now, all she had was patience and the quiet, unshaken belief that truth, no matter how long it took, would find its way to light. That night, the house felt different. The golden light of the afternoon had faded into the muted hush of twilight, leaving the mansion cloaked in long shadows. The air was tense, as though even the walls were holding their breath. Upstairs, the family retired early, their tempers still simmering from the storm of accusations. But downstairs, in the quiet rooms where silence reigned, the maid remained awake. Her heart beat steadily, though her hands shook faintly as she set her plan in motion. She moved with deliberate care, her eyes sharp, her movements precise. On the polished wooden table in the drawing room, she placed a single object, a silver brooch, gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was valuable enough to tempt, small enough to vanish quickly. She positioned it purposefully, not hidden, but displayed in plain sight, as though forgotten by careless hands. Then she stepped back into the shadows. The room was bathed in half-darkness, the last hues of twilight flickering through the tall windows. She stood still, her breath shallow, her figure blending with the curtain's folds. Every sound in the house felt amplified: the faint ticking of the clock, the groan of wood as it settled, the distant hum of voices upstairs. She waited. Minutes dragged into an hour. The night deepened, the silence pressing heavier, but she did not move. Her patience was her armor, her silence her strength. And then at last the soft creak of the back door. Her pulse quickened, but her body remained still. Footsteps, careful yet hurried, brushed against the marble floor. A shadow stretched across the hallway, slipping closer until it entered the room. The figure was familiar, and that was what made it most shocking. He moved with confidence, without fear of being caught. A trusted family friend, one who had dined in their halls, shared laughter in their company, spoken words of comfort and advice. A man the family welcomed with open arms, someone they would never suspect. He paused at the doorway, glancing once over his shoulder. Then, with ease born of practice, he crossed the room, his eyes fixed on the brooch, shining faintly in the low light. His hand stretched forward, fingers curling with quiet greed. That was the moment she stepped from the shadows. Her voice broke the silence, calm yet sharp enough to cut through the air. "Looking for this?" The man froze. His hand hovered inches above the brooch, his entire body stiffening as though struck by lightning. Slowly, his head turned toward her. His eyes widened, not just in shock at being caught, but in disbelief that she, the one so quietly overlooked, had outwitted him. She stepped closer, her posture straight, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. In the dim light, her expression was unreadable, neither triumphant nor afraid, but filled with quiet certainty. The man stammered, his mouth opening to form excuses that never came. Words tangled in his throat, crumbling under the weight of his guilt. For a long moment, the room held only silence. The thief caught the maid standing tall, the truth suspended between them. The clock ticked, each second louder than the last, marking the unraveling of the family's prejudice. At that precise instant, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Drawn by her voice, the master and mistress appeared at the doorway, their eyes narrowing in confusion. And then they saw him, their friend, their guest, caught in the act, his hand inches from the stolen brooch, his face pale with shame. The mistress gasped, covering her mouth. The master's face hardened, rage and disbelief battling within. For once, their eyes did not turn to the maid. For once, they saw the truth standing plain before them. The maid did not gloat, nor did she shout. She simply stood where she was, her voice low but unwavering. "I told you I had taken nothing." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation that had come before. In that moment, the balance shifted. The quiet, unseen woman who had borne their doubt was no longer the accused. She was the one who had revealed the truth, steady and unbroken, while the real thief stood exposed in the fading light of night. The room seemed to freeze in time. The faint glow from the chandelier above shimmered across polished floors, casting long, trembling shadows. The family stood at the doorway, their eyes locked on the scene before them, the trusted friend, hand hovering guiltily over the silver brooch, and the maid calm, steady, unshaken, emerging from the shadows like truth itself revealed. Gasps broke the silence. The mistress clutched at her chest as if steadying her own heartbeat. The master's jaw tightened, his breath shallow, his face flushed with the sting of betrayal. For weeks, his suspicion had been sharpened into accusation, all of it aimed at the wrong target. And now, before his very eyes, the mask of trust slipped away to expose the real thief. The man caught in the act stammered. Words tumbled from his lips, broken and useless. I was only, he tried, but even his voice betrayed him, weak and brittle. His excuses dissolved in the heavy silence, echoing against walls that had so often carried laughter and empty assurances of friendship. The maid stood tall, her hands clasped before her. Though her heart still thudded from the confrontation, her face bore no trace of triumph. She did not sneer, nor did she relish the vindication. Instead, she lifted her gaze, her voice quiet but carrying through the room with a strength that silenced every restless thought. "Honesty does not need to defend itself loudly," she said, her tone smooth, measured. "Truth always reveals its own path." The words hung in the air like a weight no one could escape. The family shifted uneasily, their eyes lowering as shame crept into their faces. They remembered every suspicious glance, every whispered conversation, every cold silence at the dinner table that had painted her guilty without proof. And now, all of that prejudice, built up from doubt and mistrust, crumbled in an instant. The mistress stepped forward, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak but could not find the words. Guilt pressed down on her like a heavy cloak. How many times had she warned her children to keep their belongings close, certain that the quiet maid could not be trusted? How many times had she looked past the gentleness in the woman's hands, choosing instead to believe her skin told a different story? The master finally broke the silence, his voice rough, unsteady. All this time, his eyes darted between the thief and the maid, anger and shame battling within him. All this time, and we accused the wrong person. The family friend, once welcomed with open arms, now cowered. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He looked smaller somehow, the weight of exposure crushing whatever pride he once carried. The children, peeking from behind the staircase, whispered among themselves, their innocent eyes wide with confusion. For them, the moment was more than a revelation. It was the shattering of a lie they had unknowingly lived within. Yet, in the midst of their shame, the maid did not linger on their guilt. She stood in the same quiet dignity she always had, the same patience with which she had polished their silverware, folded their linens, carried their doubts. The truth had finally spoken, and she had no need to add bitterness to its voice. Family bowed their heads, each one aware of how deeply they had wronged her. And though the house was heavy with silence, the air itself seemed to shift. It was as if a veil had been torn away, revealing not only the face of the thief but also the ugliness of their own prejudice. And there she stood unbroken, untouched by their suspicion, proving that true integrity requires no defense, only time. The silence in the grand room lingered long after the thief was taken away. The family stood rooted in place, each weighed down by their own shame, their faces pale in the soft glow of the chandelier. The maid did not gloat, nor did she linger on their guilt. She had carried the burden of their suspicion long enough, and tonight she had laid it down without bitterness. Her calm presence filled the room, more powerful than anger ever could be. The words she had spoken, honesty does not need to defend itself loudly. Truth always reveals its own path, echoed in their minds, reshaping their understanding of everything they had done. In the quiet aftermath, it became clear the true theft had not been the jewels or trinkets. It had been their trust, stolen by their own prejudice. They had looked at her skin, her station, her silence, and saw only suspicion. They had judged her not by her character, but by the weight of their own bias. The narrator's voice cut through this reflection, steady and firm, like a lesson carved into stone. Prejudice blinds us, making us see guilt where there is none. It poisons the heart, replacing truth with fear, and turning innocence into a target. But the maid's patience and integrity prove that truth, though silent, cannot be buried. It waits. It watches, and when the moment is right, it rises. The Feythu mistress bowed her head, tears brimming in her eyes. The master clenched his fists at his sides, not out of anger now, but out of shame. The children, who had once whispered questions about missing things, now gazed at the maid with new eyes full of respect, perhaps even admiration. But the maid did not remain to see their regret deepen. She knew apologies might follow. Words of sorrow and shame might be spoken, but she no longer needed them. The truth was enough. Quietly, she untied her apron and folded it neatly, placing it on the table where the silver brooch had once rested. Her hands, the same hands that had polished their furniture and swept their floors, lingered for a moment as if saying farewell. Then, with a steady breath, she turned toward the door. The evening air greeted her as she stepped outside. The sky was painted in hues of amber and gold, the sun sinking low on the horizon, spilling light across the world like a final blessing. The warm breeze brushed against her skin, carrying with it a sense of freedom she had not felt in months. She walked slowly at first, then with more certainty, her back straight, her head lifted. She was no longer just a servant defined by suspicion, no longer the silent figure shadowed by distrust. She walked as a woman whose dignity had triumphed over doubt, whose patience had defeated prejudice, and whose quiet strength had outlasted lies. Behind her, the mansion loomed in silence. Inside, a family wrestled with guilt and the bitter taste of their own blindness. But she no longer belonged to that silence. The final image held her in motion, her figure framed against the golden sunset, her shadow stretching long across the earth. She carried nothing in her hands, yet in truth, she carried everything that mattered: her honesty, her resilience, her unbroken spirit. And in that glow, her story became larger than the house she left behind. It became a reminder that truth may bend under suspicion, but it does not break. Dignity may be doubted, but it will always rise. For in the end, the maid had proven not just her innocence, but something greater, that even in a world clouded by prejudice, the light of integrity shines through, unshaken and eternal.